son up there.
Here a wolf, there a wolf, everywhere.
I'm so sorry. Winston Churchill said, "Criticism may not be agreeable, but it is necessary. It calls attention to the unhealthy state of things. And the state of children's theatre in this country is most certainly unhealthy."
He said watching me was like watching a hee-haw girl trying to play Lear. I don't even know what that means.
The direction was staid, the sets ramshackle, the costumes unremarkable, hardly worth the free admission.
But we tried hard.
Try telling that to the spirits of Ibsen and Brecht, because you've just trampled all over them. All of you. Space.
He's harsh, but he has impeccable taste. I never see a kid's play unless he recommends it.
Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the
How dare you, sir? Does the fourth wall mean nothing to you? Amateur.
He reviewed my performance as Templeton in Charlotte's Web when I was 8. Said I was, quote, pedestrian, fit only for cleaning the stage, not for treading upon it. Turns out he was right.
This is where I keep some of my favorite reviews. Oh, here's one. Little Orphan Annie, as performed by Jenny Mason, age 7, really deserved to be an orphan, given this performance.
Everybody loves a critic, right? Jeremy, you won the coffee card today, buddy. Yeah, you did.
Oh, thanks.
Which is a problem because you have a disposable cup in your hand. It's over there. So you brought it, but you're still destroying the environment. I like that. That's good. Okay, that makes sense. A man of both worlds. You've expanded your horizons, where you're in the in-between, between being a polluter and an environmentalist. That's good. You're in transition. That's good. All right, critics. We love to. Never live that down, eh? Critics. This is an interesting but very serious topic for a couple of reasons. One is I don't know about you, but I am fairly susceptible to criticism. I don't like it when people criticize me. And I don't like when people are angry at me. And being a public figure, you actually sometimes do get critics. Not very many. This is a wonderful church, but you do get them from time to time. And it's hard to allow those kind of barbs to come your way, right? And you probably do too. You may have a boss who's extremely critical, someone that the only attention they ever pay to you is when you do something wrong. Or you have a family member, today's Thanksgiving, and this family member is going to show up and probably make some kind of comment about your hair or your house or your demeanor or your education or your spouse or your choices. And there's going to be some little cutting, sarcastic remark, a criticism. So some of you maybe, you have a friend who's very critical, but also very funny. And so you like being around them because they're so witty and so that. But you ask yourself, when I'm not around, does that person criticize me? Chances are, if they gossip with you, they will gossip about you, right? And so this is something we all have in our lives, and there are times we are overly critical. A lot of times we look at people we can't relate to or we can't associate in a way that we understand how they think. We've never been in the position they've been in, but we will look at their conduct and we will say, how dare you? This person is this person is that. Some of us level criticisms at groups. Sometimes someone will criticize the opposite sex, saying, the opposite sex, they're all like this, right? Or some will say it about, sometimes the elderly will say it about the young, the kids these days, they don't appreciate things, they're lazy, they're all those kind of things. One of my favorite quotes is a little quote I keep in my Bible, and it's a quote by an intellectual talking about how kids these days are rebellious and they don't respect their elders, and when I was a kid it was different and everything like that. It's actually written by Socrates. 2,300 years ago, right? And you'll hear that parroted. And then some young people look at people who are older and they think they're out of date, they're dumb, they're out of touch, they're pathetic, and you know things that they don't know. And I never forget, one of my majors was psychology, and coming coming home and sitting and watching my mother. I wonder if the reason I'm like this is because you did this, you know? My mother is a wonderful woman, but she does not suffer fools. And I just took a couple comments from me, and she said it straight, you know. She said it really straight. Because my mother had so many degrees, you know, I can't keep up with them, and she's quite a bright lady, but, you know, nobody likes to be psychoanalyzed, but I thought when I was, 20 years old, I knew it all, right? Sometimes it will be, people from different nationalities, people from certain areas of the world, and we'll look at them, and they're all like this, or they're all like that, and sometimes we'll take general trends, and we'll impose them on people, so the first time we meet them, we have this bias or the stereotype of them. Some people have it, against pastors. Like I remember once I stumbled on the internet. I was talking to someone, and I got the wrong text message, like I got the wrong thing, and I sent it to this guy, and I said, I apologize. This, I'm sorry, as pastor, I was trying to speak to this, congregant, and I mentioned it was a she, and then he started sending me this flurry of texts that I was a sexual predator trying to harm this girl, and that all us clergy are like this, and all those kind of things. And he didn't even know me, right? He didn't even know my name. And, that's an interesting way to look at people, but some people look at people in a certain light, right? And so there's a lot of conclusions we jump to, and in reality, the dealing with criticism often has to do with time frames. And I'll share a little bit about that in the coming points and some of the things. First of all, Aristotle once wrote, "To avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing." And he's right there. Here's the thing, no matter what you do in life, you're going to get some critics. And so the question is, how do I deal with them? It's particularly can be difficult when you are in close proximity to a critic, like someone who, maybe in your family or someone's close to you or a coworker or boss. You can't just shield that person out of your life. They're there, right? And so how do you deal with people like this? Because as a follower of Jesus Christ, we love people. And so how do you love somebody that's being like a social porcupine? All right, so we're going to deal with a couple things. First of all, what are some attributes of a critic? One, they are relentless. Critics, they never seem to grow tired of pointing out the flaws of others. Some people, if you're expressing a certain thing, you get exhausted over time doing it, like you wear out. Not critics. Critics can keep going forever. They have these spiels, they have these things, and they're really hard, especially when they're funny, right, to not do it. Some of the best comedians are just critical people, right? And their observations are somewhat accurate, and so they're easy to laugh at, but the problem is you're laughing at someone's made in God's image. They have a blind spot themselves. Critics tend to not like critics, okay, when they pertain to them. Someone once said, the sin that probably bothers you the most in other people is the one you struggle with the most. And critics are not exceptions to this rule. It tends to be if they're very critical. If anybody criticizes them, they go from 0 to 10 in no time at all. They mix legitimate faults with elevated emotion. And this is an important one, is sometimes they will point out something that's true. But they elevate their emotion and they use a lot of anger or condemnation or pride. And often the emotion doesn't match the social network they're a part of. Like sometime, I'll never forget, one time I was appointed to a ministry. It was my first pastoral ministry. And I was asked to take over a group that was really dysfunctional. And I went to the senior pastor and I said, everybody in the church knows this group needs to change. Some things need to be done. Can I have your permission to break a few eggs? And he said, please, someone has to fix this group. If you do that, I will be so grateful. So I set about to try things. Now I was a rookie and I made some mistakes and stuff like that, but I'll never forget. I made an announcement about something about people we were reaching and all that kind of stuff. And some people took umbrage with that. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my office and a lady came in to talk to me who was part of that group. And this was a person who I considered a friend and someone who I could talk freely with. But they came in, and after 10 minutes, they were saying things like, you're just like my father. He would do something like this. and this caustic, poisonous thing was coming out. And I'm like, excuse me, like we've known each other for years, but for that person, they were deducing that the role I had, they were transferring animosity to me that belonged really to an abusive father, because she had an abusive father and everybody knew she had an abusive father. So it was kind of this transference that was going on. Sometimes when people are criticizing you, they're relating it to something else that they're a part of it. And that's why the emotional quotient's so high. That's why they get so worked up over it. You ever try to, shortchange somebody and that person freaks out. They don't even know your name, but 50 cents, they're willing to die for it, right? And what is that about? That's about control. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with control. I'll never forget, when I worked here at the college, we had a small charity we ran, and they gave receipts for $5 donation, or they didn't give receipts for $5 donation because it was under the limit of where you get a charitable receipt. I think, is it $20 or $25, Karen? You remember? 20? Yeah. So you issue a receipt, it was 20. Well, it was this one person had given a $5 donation. They wanted it for their tax. And we said, well, we don't do it. It's less than $20. Anyways, that person got so mad at us, they wrote letters, all those kind of things, over $5, right? It happens. And then they feed off others' reactions. They feed off others' reactions. And so one of the things a critic loves to do is get a rise out of you. And they love to get you, right? And because it may verify or may legitimize what they're doing, or they're somebody that is trying to draw attention to themselves, so they use criticism to get it. Okay? So, how do we deal with critical people? First of all, I apologize, I spelled critical on this next slide wrong. I also have a typo on the thing I handed out today. I was supposed to fix, it was counsel, and I had an S in or whatever. So critical is a different word. I'm creating language as we go. Isn't that wonderful? Webster's, will notify them. First of all, know the difference between destructive and constructive criticism. This is the first step to being able to deal with criticism, okay? One of the hardest things about criticism is accepting it when they have a point, all right? And constructive criticism is actually very helpful. Craig Rochelle's a pastor in the States, and when he was first married and first a pastor, his wife, new wife, tried to talk to him about his preaching style, and she was really sweet, like she was very, soft about it, and really wonderful, and so he finally said, okay, what's wrong with my preaching? She says, well, it's your hands. And like he's like me, by the way, when I look on YouTube and I see all the pictures of my sermons on there, it seems like every one I'm going like this. Do I do that a lot? I must. Okay. Anyways, she said, your hands. She said, you have a box. And she said, if you want to preach effectively, you need to put the box down. She said, like everywhere you go, you got the box. You carry the box around. You're just always with the box. And she says, it becomes distracting. And that was a constructive criticism. Sometimes we need that. Second, except you're not perfect, this is a great way to deal with criticism. I heard someone say something once, and I've repeated it, and it makes sense. I heard a pastor with incredibly thick skin say this to me once, and he said, well, if they're picking on me, they're probably leaving someone else alone. It was like, hey, all right, bring it on. It's all good, I'm not perfect. I don't profess to be, kind of thing. It can be a wonderful thing. Critics often think their own behavior is right and good. And that's why they have such a hard time taking criticism. And there's an adage, hurt people. And sometimes a critical person had someone in their life before who was incredibly critical and hurt them deeply, who was never happy. And so they carry around this critical spirit because the worst things they want to acknowledge is that they have any imperfections, right? One of the ways that we can deal with criticism is accepting that you're not perfect. It doesn't justify you being, a criminal or something, but it does justify you enough to say, yeah, I got some blind spots. Sometimes I can be callous, rude. Sometimes I can say bad things about people. Sometimes I can be cheap or gullible or any of those things. Acknowledging that's not a bad thing to do. Third, this is the hardest. Don't take it personally. even when it's personal. Critics are incredibly good at getting in your weak spots or your most vulnerable spots and attacking you there, especially if it's someone you know really well or if it's a boss you know really well. Because as we look back at last week, was controlling people. People of this nature use their gift to motivate people. They do it to get you to do what they want or get you to feel what they want. And the next thing, work on being less sensitive. Okay? This is something else too. Toughen up your skin. All right? So, how do you respond to critical people? First one is often you don't respond. Often you don't respond. First Peter, this is Peter who knew Jesus just about as well as anybody in the world did. He said, when they hurled insults at him, Jesus, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he trusted himself to him who judges justly. 1 Peter 2:23. This is incredibly hard, but incredibly effective. Sometimes when a critic talks to you, the best thing you can do is just sit there and not say anything. Or if they gossip about you and people want, and your immediate reaction is defend yourself, just to say, well, all right. This can be hard because we want to justify ourselves. But sometimes an effective silence can be, are you guys knitting a scarf? That is so cool. Hold it up. You are so your mother's daughter. That's what she does. She watches my sermons and knits, or sits in the back and knits. That's a cool sweater. I like that. I like the color. All right, where was I? Sitting silently. Okay? Sometimes the most frustrating thing for a critic is when you don't get a reaction out of people. And sometimes they'll up their game and make themselves obvious to everybody else. Jesus was a master of this. Many, many times people said things about him, and he didn't run around after the Pharisees saying, guys, I'm not Beelzebub, guys, come on, give me a chance. He didn't do that. They criticized him, and he answered them with silence. Because what they said was absurd. And sometimes absurdity just needs silence. Sometimes critics, even if it's something legitimate, are you trying to please God or them? I can guarantee you, God is way easier to please than a critic. He's way easier to please than a critic. Jesus once said, even those who give a cup of water in my name will be rewarded. A cup of water. Wow. Your critic in your life is probably somebody who's never going to be happy. Or, sometimes the best thing to do is to answer with quietness. A person's wisdom yields patience, and to one's glory is to overlook an offense. Overlook is a present word. What it means is to go over something. To overlook it is to go over it or get over it. You ever hear anybody say, get over it? Sometimes the best way to deal with a criticism is right in the moment. Oh, all right, I'm going to just let that go. And you know what? It's incredible. You can learn some tremendous patience in this. Because sometimes someone's just having a bad day, right? And they're really critical. Sometimes somebody, is, I really struggle with slow drivers and bad drivers, okay? And I really struggle with that. But when my wife says something from time to time that really helps me out, she says, maybe they're not having the best day. And maybe they're not. Maybe they have some health problems. Maybe something just tragic just happened to them. Maybe they're the worst driver and they should have their driver's license taken away and put on Canada's worst drivers and all those kind of things. That's where I go. But, maybe they are having a bad day. I know when I'm having a bad day, I don't drive as well. Second thing, sometimes you respond carefully. This is what I call the pause and reflect methodology in dealing with critics. It says in the book of Judges, we just did Samson and Judges, this is another instance. It says, some Ephraimites asked Gideon, why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian? And they challenged him vigorously. But, it says, he answered them. And it goes on to say, when the men of Ephraim heard Gideon's answer, their anger subsided. You ever heard that proverb, a soft word turns away wrath? There's a lot of power in kind of sitting. That pregnant pause there is gold. Because it gives you an opportunity to answer not in anger. There's a verse in the Bible that says, in your anger, do not sin. This is the same guy that said, always be quick to listen, and slow to respond. Quick to listen, slow to respond. There's real power in that. And then a careful answer. Sometimes it's appropriate to answer. Sometimes someone will say, you did this and this and this and this, right? I'll never forget, there was a time I had when I worked here where someone accused me of stealing money when I worked with the staff here. And it was a clerical error that made, and they figured it out, and it had nothing to do with me, but it was really hurtful that someone accused me of stealing money, because I was a part-timer at that, and that probably would have been the end of my job. But this person they had a real mean streak, and they had zeroed in on me, and they made it, really difficult. And they did a number of things. I'll never forget, a year or two later, I actually stumbled across that this person was fudging the books on an error they had made. And, I could have rode that right to town. But instead, I went quietly to my supervisor. I said, I don't know if I'm seeing this right. I'll just turn it over to you, let you deal with it. And my supervisor dealt with it, right? And I had to think and pray about that, because the first thing I wanted to do is go roaring over them, trap them in a corner, and, let them have it, right? Respond carefully. Sometimes response, what you want to do is diffuse the emotion, right? Sometimes someone will say, well, you did this and this, and you'll go, yeah, probably did. I apologize. How do they respond to that, right? They can go on, but what else can you do, right? Sometimes you respond carefully, and occasionally you listen and make a change. This is a skill that the most godly people learn to master, is that someone criticizes you for unfair reasons, and you still turn the lemon into lemonade, okay? So sometimes people will pick at you and pick at your weakness and all that kind of thing, and you think, yeah, maybe I can learn something from this. Maybe there's a benefit to this. One time Paul was in prison, and while he's in prison, there were some leaders in the early church who were spreading rumors about him, and were cutting him down and trying to undermine him. And Paul says something so insightful and so big that it's just huge. Just a guy in prison, he can't do much to defend himself. He said, I at least am glad that Christ is being preached. He looked at it and he went, they're saying all this about me, but hey, here's a beautiful thing that's happening. They think they're trying to tear me down, and they're lifting Jesus up. Isn't that great? Who cares about me? Right? Sometimes someone will criticize you for something, and it's like you're having a bad day, you don't want to hear it or whatever kind of thing, but take it and just mull over it a little bit, maybe bounce it off a friend and say, hey, do I do this? Or am I this? And you want the kind of friend that's going to be honest with you, not the kind of friend that's going to disagree with anybody that disagrees with you, right? But sometimes the best thing you do is go, hey, maybe they have a point. Maybe I do preach too long. Maybe the fact they fall asleep every week when I'm preaching, should say something to me, right? I'm just kidding. I don't preach long. I'm wonderful. All right. Last one. How do you respond to critical people? Always work to guard your heart. The heart is a wellspring of life, the Bible says. It says some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. And then Romans, why do you condemn another believer? Why do you look down on another believer? Remember, we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Yes, each of us will give a personal account to God. Let's stop condemning each other. Okay? Your heart, I have learned in my short time as a minister that the most valuable asset in a human being is a good heart. Is a good heart. If I have an individual who's got some talent but a great heart, that is a killer combination. If I know an individual who is teachable and kind, and they have a good heart, and they're not cluttered up with resentment and bitterness and anger and a critical spirit, I am always amazed at what a person like that can accomplish. I've seen Jesus move through some incredible people who had some amazing handicaps, but they had a good heart. And Christ had this long line of people who would follow them or observe them or love them. Remember Bill Graham? He passed away of cancer a couple of years ago here. Bill just lit up a room. He was such a good guy. He was a guy who Jesus saved him from alcoholism. On a Saturday night, he was drunk, feeling like his life was over. The only guy he knew in his life who had anything together was another guy in Lindsay. So he called him and he said, my life's in shambles. I don't know what to do. They knew each other through one of these, kind of marketing things. And the guy said, well, why don't you go to church? And Bill said, I don't know any church. Which church should I go to? And he said, well, come to mine. It was really interesting because the guy that invited him actually didn't stay with the church. He wandered back, out a little bit, and I'm in touch with him, and I pray for him and all those kind of things. But Bill got here, and it was like God just overwhelmed him. And to hear him talk, he would just cry and, talk about what Jesus meant to him. And Tony would say hi, and he was, hi, Tony, like he was just a positive guy. He's a wonderful guy. He made coffee. He helped and he served. He did a lot of things that other people don't notice. But man, he had a big heart. And I had the privilege of sitting with him while he went into eternity, reading that verse from 1 Corinthians, death, where is your sting? Talking about Christ making us new in his kingdom as Bill stepped into eternity. Wonderful man, great heart. Always guard your heart. This world will try to throw muddy tar that will stick to your heart. And there's nothing the enemy wants to do more than crush your heart. I'm going to get this quote wrong, but one of the quotes we had today was, don't let praise go through your head and criticism to your heart. Right? Don't let praise go to your head and criticism to your heart. Keep balance. Guard your heart, for it's a wellspring of life. And you do that by dealing right away with things. You do that by recognizing you can't please a critic. You recognize that by understanding that your approval comes from God. You recognize that by taking a careful look at any criticism and going, God, is there something I can change here? You do that by uncluttering it, by not building resentment and anger and letting it take seed in your heart. Okay? Just in closing, when I am the critical person, first, what is the value of leveling this criticism? Like if you want to criticize someone, what's the value of this? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to elevate your own importance, don't say it. Gossip is the field that seeds criticism. Gossip is a seed or field that seeds criticism. You know how we learn to be critics and we say biting remarks? We practice when we gossip. Because we will say something behind someone's back that we would never say to their face. Right? This is actually a major problem in our society. People who are online who will send horrible tweets or texts or comments to people who they're not face-to-face with. There's a horrible problem with that on the internet. And gossip's very similar to that. Someone will say something horrible about you behind your back that they would never say to your face. That's why gossip is listed as one of the 7 deadly sins. God hates gossip. So if you have this habit of tearing others down behind their back, chances are you're going to have a problem with criticism. And that criticism, you may never tell the person, or you may say it in your remarks, but most people are pretty intuitive, and if you don't like them and you're talking about them, they're going to pick it up. I always say to someone, sometimes someone will be gossiping about someone in the church or a staff member or me or something like that, and I'll confront the person and I say, hey, I heard some things, is everything okay, and all that kind of stuff. And they said, they'll say, how did you find out? I said, a little lesson I learned long ago, if they gossip to you, they will gossip about you. And that's true. It's true. Is this a fair and important thing that needs to be said? Is my criticism, is it necessary? Right? Is this person doing something on one day that maybe they're having a horrible day, or is this actually a repeated thing that you actually want to help? I always have this policy as well. I never share deep conversations or critical conversations with someone that I haven't earned the right to have an ear with. You know what I mean? Like when I have to say something to somebody, I want them to know that I love them and I value their best. If you have that policy, you're going to have a lot more success when you do get an opportunity. And that Galatians verse is right. Be careful lest you be tempted, right? When that goes on. Use God as your sounding board. This is huge. Never say or confront somebody in something until you first bathe it in prayer. Reach up. Talk to God about it. Ask God to scrutinize your heart. Ask God for eyes to see. Ask God what's necessary, what's not necessary. Pray for God to give you wisdom if you ever have to talk to someone. And then ensure the timing, location, privacy, and tone are right before you share your concern. This is huge too. You know, if I have something to say to my boys right before dinner is the worst possible time, right? Because they're hungry, right? Timing's important. You know, are the phones off? Is it just between the two of you? Do you march up to somebody, you know, in a crowd so everybody can hear it? You know, you sit down, you bathe it in prayer, you couch it with, you know, listen, I really love you. And there's so many good qualities. There's just something, you know, I've been seeing, and I want to talk to you about it, and, you know, maybe you can shed some light, and just to be open to that. Because someday, you'll be the one on the receiving end of it. And you want to have the right reaction. So try that out. All right? That's all I got to say about that. So, we got a couple minutes for questions. The baskets are going to come around. And there's outies and the innies. Yep, just give me a second, Jeremy. You're ready to go already, eh? Yeah, outies are going to come around, the ones that take stuff out of, and then there's the innies. I'm going to show a little video on thankfulness. This is a bit of a tearjerker. I know some of you are really going through it right now, so I'm not trying to break your hearts. It's just the best Thanksgiving video I've ever seen. And so I'm going to show that while the baskets are going around, then we'll take a couple minutes for question, closing this off. Reverse. All right, got time for a couple questions. Dennis is here with the mic. I think Jeremy had one.
I was just wondering, when you mentioned about the criticism for this week, I was thinking about this one particular fellow tonight at my CR group, and he's always the kind of person that's a nice person to talk to, but he always had things to say that were maybe critical. You know, he was trying to be joking at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there a way that we can come across those kind of influences and tell people that even though it's fun to joke, that there are times that if you're being critical that you shouldn't do that? Or what's the best way?
You know, the three things I walk through, sometimes the best thing to do when someone tries to gossip with you is not say anything. You know, they're saying, oh, did you hear so-and-so did that? Just look at them. It's awkward. They say, well, you know, and they did this and this and this. Well, what do you want me to do about it? You know, I had one guy, one time he came to me and he just ripping this guy apart. I said, you know what? You maybe have a point. Let's go and talk to him about it. Do you want me to bring you over and you can talk and we'll discuss this with him? He's like, oh, I'm not doing that. You know, and walked away. You know, sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just a gentle, hey, let's change direction, right? You know, someone will be gossiping to you and you can either, yeah, but you know what they do really well is this. Or you can go, oh, that's cool. Hey, look, a bird, a squirrel, you know, something like that. Just to distract them, right? Take them off topic, you know? And sometimes you can just be direct and you can say, you know what? As a follower of Christ, I think to tear people down is not a good thing, right? And then other times, Jared, just let it go. You know, maybe they're having a bad day or maybe that's something you struggle with and all that kind of stuff. People who are overly caustic and critical, try to look for people that are going to laugh at it or are going to be really effective. But if you're one of those people and people pick up on it, it's bouncing off you, it can be, you know. Yeah. Well, you can take them all back and beat them up. That's always an option. Yeah, you know, that's a wise option. I'm sure that won't end badly. All right, Jane. Al. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, you know, what you said earlier about the hurt people, people hurt people.
Yeah.
And what about the bully?
Yeah.
You know, we all have a lot of background for what happens to the people that are victims of bullies, because we've all been victims of bullies at one point in our life or another.
Yeah.
But what about the bully?
Yeah.
There's nothing there for the bully.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a reason that they're acting the way they're acting.
Yes.
That's all to say.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. There was a kid named Todd. I remember it was in 4th or 5th grade, and Todd, he was a bully. Like, he went around picked on people. And I remember one day I went home with him. We were just picking something up, and he lived a few blocks from the school. And while we were there, his drunk father screamed at him constantly to butter some bread and bring it to him. And like, he was just taking a minute, he was putting it together, his hands were shaking, and he was yelling at him and all this kind of thing. And I just saw another side of him after that. You know, this kid has, you know, is obviously in a horrible situation. You know, and you're right. Sometimes sometimes people are just mean. You know, they're just mean, they're bullies, and that kind of thing. And even if they're bullied, they're acting out the wrong way. But it is good to be able to look at people in God's image and say, how did they get this broken? You know, how did this happen? You know, and so yeah. Jane, hi.
It's a little maybe off topic of stream, but I think we have to be careful on protecting our heart too much, because courage
Yeah.
is a challenge
Yes.
that puts yourself out there for vulnerability,
Yes.
which will bring criticism.
Yes.
But we have to instill in us to try to have that courage to put ourselves out there,
Yes.
expecting the criticism,
Yeah.
and then reaching to the people that love us the most.
Oh, that's a good point, Jane. You're right. An isolated heart will become a hard heart, right? You know, and God is love. What does love do? Love reaches out, and you're going to be hurt in this world, right? You're going to be let down. People are going to disappoint you. There may be times you're disappointed with God, right? But that doesn't. Guarding your heart isn't holding yourself up in a closet. Guarding your heart is being able to deal with situations with courage, right? And then when these things happen and the criticisms come, you have a proper reaction. You think prayerfully. And this is where the pause comes in. Sometimes a 10-second pause can change a life. It really can, because somebody says something and your immediate reaction, you know, I'm notorious for this. Someone will say something really mean, and I'll think of a great answer 15 minutes later. You know, you want to roar back and give them that answer. But sometimes you're quick-witted enough, you've got some real smashing back and all that kind of thing. Sometimes it's funny and it diffuses things, but other times it's just mean, right? Taking time to pause and reflect is really important. Okay, one more. Yes, Quinn, over here. You put your hand up, Grace, did you? Okay.
So I know criticism can be really destructive and affect you quite badly.
Yeah.
But before you take on the criticism, I think it's worthwhile examining the motive behind the criticism. Why is the person saying that to me? And it may well be constructive, but if you look at why he's saying to you, you might realize this is not even worth thinking about. I don't care what this person's opinion is, or it allows you a little bit of extra thinking to formulate a response if you think of why that person's talking to you.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not always a good thing, because it can escalate the situation. You can ask someone, why do you say that? Might not be a good thing, but at least ask yourself, why are they saying that?
That's good.
And I think you should always confront criticism, not necessarily the person, but the criticism. You've got to deal with it. Don't let it slip. You've got to deal with it. You've got to say, that person's saying it for his own elevation, make himself feel better. It may be, maybe that's true. Maybe I am that. Maybe I should change.
Yeah.
In which case, you can actually ask the person, how do I improve on that? And you'll find, oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Suddenly they don't want to help anymore.
It really, the reaction often is not what they expect, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, so I think that cooperation might help you. It might help them.
Yeah.
It'll be a positive thing.
Yeah.
But I think always deal with why is it coming.
Yeah. There's an old art to the idea of winning over a critic. You know, someone starts, you know, I'm a fourth born. I had 3 big sisters and a younger sister. And so being the clown, you know, comes naturally to me to a certain extent. And those of you who are firstborns who have gotten Christmas cards from me know this, right? But sometimes that can be a very effective, me using my ability for humor to take somebody that's really worked up and help work them into a place, where it can influence them, right? So sometimes, someone is a critic, or sometimes somebody's a critic, they're a hurt person, and they're really hard on you. But some people go, great, opportunity to learn, okay? And they hang around that person, and after a while, the person really softens, but they're a hard teacher, but they're a good teacher. I had some teachers in school that were particularly hard-headed and really hard on their students. But I found a lot of them, they did have a heart. They just expressed it funny, right? And learning that can be something. But we've got, I know some of you have turkeys. Grace, save your question for next week, okay? But what we'll ask you to do is in closing, why don't you stand? We're going to close in a song.